Welcome to episode 1 of Between the 20s, a podcast brought to you by the University of Chicago Sports Business Association. This is Amer. Today I'm joined by Mike and Bryce. We're going to discuss our overall consensus top 50 football players for 2019. Before we start, check out the UChicago Sports Business Association's website. Check us out on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. All these links are in the description and on screen. How you boys doing today?
I am doing great, Amer. Great to be here talking with you guys. So excited to go over this. So excited for the fantasy football season. Only 3 days before game one. It's going to be very exciting. Bears, Packers. Got my Bears gear ready to go.
Sounds good, Mike. Bryce?
You know it, man. I'm pumped for football season to come back. Got to break out the Troop jersey, the Mitch jersey. Gonna have some fun this week.
All right, boys. Let's get started with the first overall player in these rankings, Saquon Barkley. What do you boys think?
I mean,
consensus number one. All seem to agree on the Giants. Don't really have many offensive weapons beyond him. Like Shepard, I really don't see as becoming much of a threat. What do you say, B?
I'm going to echo that. Saquon is an elite generational talent. He's on a team without weapons, like you said, Mike. He's going to get the majority of the touches. He did well against the stack box last year. I wouldn't expect that to change. He's my number one overall without question in all formats.
Yeah, I'm with you, boys. Only question mark I'd say with Saquon Barkley is the Giants' offense without Odell Beckham, another year of Eli. That's it. But still, enormously high ceiling, amazing talent. Not much arguments there. Let's move on. Number 2, Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara, he's just, for me, he's number 2. I know Bryce has been number 3, which really is that big of a swap there. But I just think that he's proven to be one of the most consistent running backs of the last 2 years, and I don't see a reason for him to change this year.
Look, I'm the same. As you said, Mike, I have Kamara at 3, McCaffrey at 2. Basically, the only reason for that is just McCaffrey's the guy in Carolina. Latavius Murray kind of scares me off. Not scares me off, that's kind of wrong, just because Kamara is an elite-level running back. But we know McCaffrey's going to get all of his touches, especially around the goal line. Latavius Murray might cut into that Alvin Kamara, which is why I have them flipped. But Kamara is a great back, as is McCaffrey. Can't really go wrong here at 2 or 3.
Yeah, with any of these top 3 guys, you can take them at number 1. I wouldn't be mad. But I do lean towards Alvin Kamara over Christian McCaffrey just because at this point in the draft, Alvin Kamara's got that touchdown upside. He's a touchdown machine and great offense with the Saints. So, yeah, I take him over McCaffrey, although both, as I said, great options. All right, let's move on to our consensus number 4, David Johnson.
Yeah, consensus number 4. That's fair, but I have him at 6 because personally, I don't know. He's coming off a big injury. Got to be scared about sort of that totally new offense. And they're really – I don't think they're going to be a very good team, which always makes, kind of game scripting for a running back very difficult.
So, Mike, I'm with you on the game script. I'm a big game script guy. I think that's going to be very important. The Cardinal defense it's not good, and it's not getting better. They lost Patrick Peterson. So that does scare me off a little bit. But I love the Kingsbury offense. Yeah, it's new, but David Johnson is going to be split out wide more than he was last year, opening up to more targets in PPR formats. And also, Kingsbury has come out and said he wants to run 75 plays a game. That's incredible. That makes David Johnson an elite running back just on volume alone. And this is kind of as a side note, Chase Edmonds could have some value there too, standalone, almost like a Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler last year. But just on sheer volume, I'm a big David Johnson guy. I have him ranked 4 overall, and I definitely take him there.
Yeah, I'm splitting the difference between you two guys. I have him at 5. I think he's going to get a ton of volume just like last year. Even though he had a quote-unquote down year last year, still a top 10 fantasy running back. He did not reach expectations last year, but I think new offense, high-powered offense, hopefully. And yeah, he'll be the focal point. He'll get catches. He'll get a ton of work.
And I should say the injury was 2 years ago, but the injury risk is still there.
I'm not sure the injury risk is there, just because if you remember what the injury was, he was hit helmet to the wrist on a diving catch in the end zone. That's kind of a freak thing. It's not like he tore an ACL. It's not like he's had chronic back issues. It's not soft tissue like OBJ. So those kinds of injuries scare me less just because it was kind of a freak thing. And if anything, a risk is going to be more on fumbling and ball security issues, and he didn't seem to have those last year either. And also, we're now 2 years removed from that.
I think also on top of just injury risk, with injury risk, he's 27. Most of these other guys, I mean, almost all the ones that we're kind of talking about here are younger. So that is kind of the thing that you should be afraid of.
Yeah, I'm with Bryce on this. I don't think that the wrist injury is a big thing. His legs are still fresh. He had a whole year off with fresh legs. I think he'll be totally fine. I have no injury concerns with David Johnson. Let's move on to our first wide receiver of the day, DeAndre Hopkins at rank 5.
Yeah, I should say this is the point where my rankings start to. I could see going one of two ways, and I think Amir went sort of more running back heavy, which I totally see. But I think there. So if you want to go first round running back, you can legitimately say there's I think 4 or 5 guys that you would take over DeAndre Hopkins in this situation. Because I'm personally am a first round running back guy most of the time, but here I've kind of brought the wide receivers into it a little bit just to be kind of more to the consensus, because really these wide receivers and running backs have the same value over replacement at this slot. So it's really a positional choice. And here I put DeAndre Hopkins over the running backs, but I do think that you could kind of flip and flop them here. I could totally see taking Connor or Elliott or Chubb over Hopkins.
Mike, buddy, I love the VAR plug there. But that being said, I'm with you. I do like running backs more. I definitely am the kind of guy that too likes to target running backs in the first round, especially if you have a shot at an elite one. But Nuke is too elite to be passed up here, I think. I haven't ranked true 5. I think you both have them at 7. I have him at 7. To me, he is the focal point of that offense. They lost Lamar Miller already. Deshaun Watson's an elite quarterback. Will Fuller's got the injury history. Kiki QT already has an injury. He's the guy there. And don't forget, the Texans just picked up Larry Tunsil in a huge trade with the Dolphins. So Deshaun Watson's going to have more time to throw. And he'll be safer in the pocket. So that might lessen Watson's rushing ability, but will definitely heighten potentially Nuke's targets, which would even be crazier than last year. So I'm definitely a big DeAndre Hopkins guy. But it's going to depend on your draft strategy there. I can totally see. I'm with you, Mike. You can go James Conner. You can go Ezekiel Elliott, even a Nick Chubb. But I think DeAndre Hopkins' upside is sky high, up there with Odell Beckham.
Yeah, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, not only one of the highest floor, I think, of all the wide receivers. I think he's got huge upside, superstar talent, great offense. Not much to argue out there. Let's move down to number 6. We got James Conner, running back 5.
I mean, there's a huge vacuum there now that Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, that's 2 of the biggest playmakers there. I mean, obviously Bell wasn't there last year, but I think what's interesting about last year is it tells you that Connor can maintain a full season workload, which I think is very important. And also now that Brown's gone, you probably will see him getting more touches. So I totally see how James Conner is all of a sudden first round running back.
I'm with you. I think people are sleeping on him. I view James Conner as an elite level running back. He's my 7 overall and my RB5. That's elite level production. He was in that range last year. I loved what he did. To me, James Conner, he's safe. And I don't like Jalen Samuels all that much. People think he's going to take touches. I don't. I see James Conner being a focal point of that offense with Juju. Also, you're looking at a top-tier defense here. So game script might prove that a running back would be a little bit better in this offense. You never know how the Steelers are going to operate, especially with the AFC North being a little bit tougher this year. But I think people are sleeping on James Conner. I'd absolutely take him up there with that elite tier of running backs, with kind of that tier 2 with David Johnson, Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook, those kind of guys.
Yeah, I have James Conner a little bit lower than you guys. Look, I love James Conner. I had him on my team last year. He saved my fantasy team last year. But I just think he did kind of break down at the end of the season. He picked up an ankle injury, picked up a concussion. And so there's a little bit of an injury risk there. I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal, but I do think the Steelers are going to cut back his workload a little bit from last year and try to look elsewhere. So I don't think he's going to have as big of a target share or as big as a workload as he did last year, but still money in the bank. I got him at 8th overall. Still a great running back. Let's move down to another great running back 6, Ezekiel Elliott at 7th overall.
I think Bryce has to do most of the talking here. Amir and I both have him at 4. Bryce, a little bit less optimistic at 15. What say you?
So here we have some variants. I do have him at 15. You guys both have him at a true 4. To me, I think Tony Pollard showed out this preseason, did very well at camp. I like him. I think that he could be what James Conner was last year, an elite level running back behind a solid offensive line, a better offensive line than the Steelers had, and a really good offense in a very bad division. So that's kind of why I like Tony Pollard, and that lessens Zeke a little bit. But even more than that, just the contract dispute. He's been in Cabo. He's been in Mexico. Hasn't showed up anywhere. Zeke, there was a report that came out the other day that said they were going to close the contract this weekend. Report that came out today that said they're further apart than they've ever been. So who knows what's going on? Jerry Jones has come out and said that he is prepared to be without Ezekiel Elliott. Yeah, take everything Jerry Jones says with a grain of salt. But to me, Tony Pollard can assume that kind of role. Ezekiel Elliott is a better talent, but that offensive line is so good that anyone can step in, akin to what Damian Williams did in the Chiefs offense last year after Kareem Hunt got suspended.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too concerned about Ezekiel Elliott at 4. He could be the number 1 if he plays all 16 games, and I think he has a chance to be the number 1 per game running back this year, so I think he's going to be a rock star when he plays. I'm actually not too concerned about the contract. I know we're hearing mixed reports. It's like every other day we're hearing something different, which is a little bit concerning, but I think he's going to be money in the bank when he gets back. As long as you take Tony Pollard in maybe the 70s, around there in your draft, I think Ezekiel Elliott's money in the bank.
Yes, I would stress that. If you are going to take Zeke, absolutely take Pollard. Absolutely. You need to have a guy that's going to be RB2 or higher if you're taking Zeke in the first round.
I mean,
I cut you off. What were you going to say?
No problem. First, Pollard, interesting. I in one league, I took Pollard without taking Elliott. I just offered the guy, I was going to give him Pollard for Galladay, and I get a 7th round draft pick next year. So that's because, I mean, even though Pollard is lower than Galladay, I definitely see the value in him having like a Pollard. So I think he might try to bite. I'm really just looking straight up for Galladay, but I figured, always negotiate up. But I do think that if you have Zeke, you definitely should look to handcuff him. Absolutely. Even go around early if necessary on Pollard, because otherwise you're just kind of stuck in a big problem every week that Zeke doesn't play.
Pollard is 100%, I think, the best handcuff to have this year in fantasy. Let's move on to number 8th overall, Nick Chubb.
Yeah, Chubb, I mean, I have him the lowest here at 13. That's by no means kind of a knock on Chubb. It's just that I think from your first rounder, you really want less than upside. You want just a sort of floor because, I mean, look at the people who drafted Le'Veon Bell in round 1 last year. They got nothing for that production, and that just kills your fantasy season. You're looking not to make a mistake here. And I think that if you do draft Chubb, you're drafting more of a question mark than I think than the other players that we kind of talked about already, because Chubb hasn't seen this workload before, and it's a totally new offense since Freddie Kitchens took over in I think week 9 last year. So that is, for me, is a big question mark. Everybody's hyping the Browns. I think at times you have to look away from the hype a little bit. They do have Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson out there as well in case Chubb really doesn't perform, which I don't think will be the case. I do think he has like running back 1 upside for sure, but like I said, you're looking to kind of maximize the floor here in the first 2 rounds.
Mike, I'm with you, buddy. I'm big on floor. First round, my philosophy, don't make a mistake. Take a guy that you know is going to produce and be that, rock solid guy to lead your team. That being said, I do have Nick Chubb ranked 9th overall, making him a first round pick. I love the talent. Great football player. Hate the situation. He's got Kareem Hunt coming back week 10. That's going to be fantasy playoffs come the next couple weeks after that. They did get rid of Duke Johnson, but we don't know what he's going to look like as a receiving back for looking at half and full PPR formats. But also look at the weapons they have. They brought in Odell Beckham Jr. They have Jarvis Landry, one of the top slot receivers in the game. I love David Njoku this year. I think David Njoku is the only guy that's going to work the seam, and Baker's got a perfect arm to work the seam. It's got the ability to fit those tight windows with his elite accuracy and plus arm talent. So love the player. If he was on a different team, he's absolutely top 4, top 5. I don't like the situation all that much.
Yeah, I'm honestly totally opposite from you guys. I have him at sixth overall. He is my running back six. I am in love with Nick Chubb this year. He only started 9 games last year. He had 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's a young guy. We've seen young running backs come in, make an immediate impact on teams. I think he's just the next one. Um, in terms of the Kareem Hunt issue, I honestly don't think it's that much of an issue. He's not going to be back till week 10, as Bryce said. And even before then, he won't even be allowed to be with the Browns before week 10. So he's not going to get any reps with the first team. When he comes back, I think in week 10, I think it'll be more of a change of pace guy. I still think Nick Chubb is going to be a beast. He's going to eat this year, especially the first 8 weeks. He's just going to be – I think he's going to be a top 5 running back to start the year. And with that kind of production, I don't see anyone taking his job. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with Nick Chubb. Let's move on to Devontae Adams, our second wide receiver and our 9th overall.
Yeah, he's the wide receiver 2. I think I have him higher than everybody else. I have him at 8. He's our overall wide receiver 2, I should say. And, I mean, you got to look at the Packers love to pass the ball. They have Aaron Rodgers. They're obviously one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And I don't see any reason for that to change. This is, once again, like we're thinking high floor at this point in the draft. First, kind of early second round. Devontae Adams he actually finished above DeAndre Hopkins in half PPR format last year. He had 218. They both really had 218 points, but Devontae Adams edged him slightly. So I think that really gives you good reason to think that Adams is definitely a good player to look out for. But in addition, he's just the red zone target for the Packers, which I think is something that's really valuable in that kind of offense.
I like Adams. I do. I don't know how you can't. You got to love the first option for Aaron Rodgers. I have him ranked, 13th overall, the lowest of all three of us. That's mostly because, and he's my wide receiver 4 overall. That's mostly because I love Julio Jones. Julio Jones, I have ranked 6th overall. I'm big on him. He's actually next on the list, I believe. But even more than that, I'm so in love with Odell Beckham Jr. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid that they're serving in Cleveland. To me, Devontae Adams is safe, but Julio Jones and Odell Beckham Jr. are going to be just as safe if you can get past some of the injury risk with higher upsides. Also something that I am worried about, not necessarily for the Packers as a team. I think it's great for the Packers. I like Geronimo Allison, and I do like Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I think they might take some targets. Aaron Rodgers is known to target his guy. So it's not going to hurt Devontae Adams, but I like Odell Beckham Jr. and Julio Jones' situation a little bit more. There's room for argument, particularly with Julio having Calvin Ridley there. But that's kind of why I'm a little bit lower on Devontae Adams. But don't get me wrong, still very high on the talent, very good situation.
Yeah, I think Devontae Adams has the highest touchdown floor from any other wide receiver. I think touchdowns are so important, so huge in fantasy for wide receivers that he just gives you that floor that anyone outside of DeAndre Hopkins just doesn't give you. And I think whenever you have Aaron Rodgers throwing you the ball and you're the number one guy, I think that's just straight money. I have no concerns about the other two guys, Geronimo Allison and Marcus Valdez-Scantling. I think they're late round flyers in fantasy, and I don't really think they will hurt Devontae Adams, his stock at all.
But I should mention, I think very good flyers because the Packers, that wide receiver 2 slot is always kind of open to start the year, and if you could kind of fit into that, you're golden.
Yep.
Yeah, I am. If we're going down this road real quick, I love MVS. MVS is big. I think he's 6'4". He's a big red zone target. And if you look at Aaron Rodgers, he's always had these kind of 2 or 3 fantasy viable receivers. For a time, it was very beginning of his career, Donald Driver, Greg Jennings, 2 always fantasy startable. Then for a while, it was Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, and then you can even throw Devontae Adams in there. All 3 were fantasy relevant. So I don't think that this offense is restricted just to Devontae Adams. I love the upside MVS holds, and Geronimo Allison to some extent too.
He also has a nickname, so it must be big time.
Yeah.
Now.
All right, let's move down to our 10th overall, Julio Jones.
I think Bryce kind of hit on him. I have him at 9. I mean, he's once again just kind of kind of a solid target down there in Atlanta as he is year after year. I think there are a few big concerns there. Sort of Sanu and Ridley. Ridley had a breakout year last year, so I think you kind of have to be a little bit afraid of them taking touches. And just in general, like the Falcons' offense, I don't necessarily trust. I don't think it's as good as it was 2 years ago when they went to the Super Bowl, which always kind of gives you a reason for caution, a reason to sort of pump the brakes on Julio Jones a little bit.
Mike, I'm actually on the reverse here. I'm very high on the Falcon offense, particularly Matt Ryan. Just going to throw a quick plug in here. Matt Ryan is going late. Draft Matt Ryan late. He's going to throw for tons of yards, tons of touchdowns. That's just a quick plug for a guy that I like as a late-round QB that really shouldn't be a late-round QB. But Julio Jones is the guy. I've heard concerns about his age. He's 30 now. Doesn't really concern me. Injury issues have, for the most part, gone away. He's a different player from Cal Ridley. Cal Ridley is a finesse route runner. Julio Jones is a physical specimen. This guy is fantastic. He doesn't concern me as much. They're going to run different kinds of route trees. I definitely like him. I don't like Devonta Freeman that much. I think there's going to be a passing offense. So we'll see. You can't go wrong with Julio really anywhere in the back end of the first round.
Yeah, we'll get to the Devonta Freeman in a little bit, but Julio Jones for me, I have him the lowest. I have him at 17th overall, which is definitely lower than a lot of people in the conventional opinion. I just can't always trust his touchdown production. And at this point in your draft, late first round, early second round, you really want guys that will get you touchdowns and will get you consistent numbers per week. And I've had Julio Jones on a couple of teams in the past, and I just haven't been overwhelmed with the amount of touchdowns he's got. He did pick it up at the end of last year, but I'm not too sure if he can keep that up into a second year. He's going to get a ton of yards, 1,500 yards, but the touchdowns are really what I'm a little bit concerned about. And that's always the story with Julio Jones, but that's why I'm kind of staying away from him this year.
I agree with that concern as well. I mean, through the first 7 weeks last year, no touchdowns for Julio Jones.
Yeah. All right, let's move down to number 11, another wide receiver, Odell Beckham Jr.
Oh, boy. I mean, I apparently have him ranked lowest here at 14, and that's just because, like I said, I'm going to say it time and time again, first 2 rounds, you're looking for floor. And to be honest, Beckham, he scares me a little bit. First of all, number one, injury risk. I mean, he just seems to be very injury prone. He's only played 16 games over the last 2 seasons, I believe, which, I mean, that's one season's worth of production over the last 2 seasons, which I don't think is something that you necessarily want to put your trust in. And 2 is a new offense. I mean, Bryce mentioned it before. It seems to be an offense that probably will supply a lot of offense, but there's always the risk there that the new system won't necessarily gel well. And you also have like the third problem, which is just kind of his attitude is always a big question mark. I mean, before he signed the big contract with the Giants last year, it seemed like everything was fine, and all of a sudden, towards the end of the year, he's calling out everybody from the general manager to his quarterback, which is always sort of a big concern. You can get that potential with Odell that he's just going to go sort of off the deep end with off the field issues, which is always a big problem for fantasy. So that's why I have him lower than you guys, I think.
Yep.
The issues are real, and they are. The guy's got soft tissue injuries. It's different from, we're talking about David Johnson before, had the wrist injury. That's more of a freak injury. Soft tissue is more chronic for OBJ. That's real. The attitude stuff, I'm not as worried about that. I am a Giant fan, so he was a head case with us. Being in Cleveland, I think, is going to help him. I have him ranked higher than everyone. I have him ranked at 8 overall. Frankly, this guy is the best shot of finishing as wide receiver 1 this year, provided he plays the requisite number of games. He is a spectacular talent. I'm willing to take the risk. Baker Mayfield is an elite level quarterback. We're seeing Odell Beckham now with a quarterback that can throw, and that's coming from a Giant fan. OBJ is going to be sky high. I'm willing to take the risk there. I have Odell Beckham in every single league with 1 draft to go.
Always diversify your assets, Bryce. Great work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Bryce here. I absolutely love Odell this year. I think he has a clear path to be the number 1 wide receiver. I think he's got huge touchdown upside with an up-and-coming Browns offense. Baker Mayfield, who can really throw the ball. He's gonna deliver it to Odell. And I think Odell's just going to be a beast this year. I have him at 12th overall, so kind of split the difference between you guys, but I still think he's going to be a beast. definitely a top 3 wide receiver for me.
I mean, but we still.
Oh man, just to add something.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike, you go.
Everybody's buying into Baker and his arm, and he's so great. But I just there's always the potential that all of a sudden this year the league is game planning for him. He wasn't the starting quarterback going into last year, so the league is going to be game planning for him. They're going to be ready for Baker to come in, and with that, there's always the potential that he's going to have a down year. And I think if he has a down year, that whole Browns offense is really going to start to have some big issues.
It is a question mark. You are taking a chance. You can't teach accuracy. We saw that with Josh Allen. You can't teach accuracy. Baker Mayfield is elite in that respect. I think he's going to get Odell Beckham Jr. the ball. The other thing to think about is OBJ is the only deep threat they have while Antonio Callaway is out. Antonio Callaway, I believe, got suspended for PEDs. So Odell Beckham is the only guy they have running downfield. I love him. I love him early. They have a great schedule, provided they're not playing the Ravens. So we'll see how they go.
Yeah, I guess I get the concerns about Baker. I just think he set the rookie touchdown record last year. He didn't even start at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
And I don't even think Baker has to be exceptional, a top 10 quarterback this year for Odell to produce. He produced with Eli Manning. Let's be real. I think even if Baker is an average to above average NFL quarterback, I think Odell is going to be just fine. I think he's a great pick this year. So moving on to another running back, we got Le'Veon Bell up next.
Le'Veon Bell, I mean, being from New York, I've heard a lot of Le'Veon Bell since he was signed. I have him at 15, which is the lowest of all of us. But this is once again one of those really the floor on Le'Veon Bell is absurdly low, and that's not the kind of risk that you want to take on at this point in the draft. I mean, we in Adam Gase's offense, I believe, has been one of the slowest offenses in football, and that obviously doesn't help Bell. And the fact that they're trying to get him that you want to get him as many touches as possible as a fantasy owner. So that's obviously a big concern. And then 2, you also have the fact that just his injury, coming back from a whole season where he really didn't play a game is always going to be a huge question mark, even if he was coming back to the exact same system, which obviously isn't the case here. So I think those are the two biggest concerns. And also the fact that this system obviously isn't, regardless from the fact that it's a different system, it's still not as strong as the Steelers with Antonio Brown and Juju on the wings, which is always a big help in kind of helping your running game get moving.
Mike, I'm with you, man. A lot of concerns about Le'Veon Bell. Again, like the talent, but he's been away from football. I have him ranked 11th overall. But as we keep talking about this stuff, and as I've been thinking about since I drafted Dalvin Cook last night, basically flipping the two of them around. I have Dalvin Cook right now at 14. We'll get to him. But Le'Veon Bell, I don't like the situation at all. And Mike, I know we keep harping on this, man. Floor, safety, that's what you're looking for early on. So we'll see. And I know I did mention Dalvin Cook with the injury risk, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get to Dalvin Cook. But just for Le'Veon Bell, I think he's got a high ceiling. I get the concerns about the floor. I have him highest out of you guys. I have him at 9. He's inside my top 10. But it's just, I get it, but talent-wise, he's top 3 running backs in the NFL. I think talent will really pick up. And an ascending New York Jets offense, Sam Darnold's going to have another year of working in this Jets offense. And I think Le'Veon Bell is going to be just fine. Definitely a late first, early second for me.
But also a different Jets offense.
Yeah, but same guy. I think.
No.
Yeah. All right, let's move down to his old teammate at 13, Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, so Juju I have here at 10th. So I think the elephant in the room we have to talk about here is that Antonio Brown is gone. And this is very good for one particular reason. And obviously this means that Juju is going to be the number one wide receiver. He's going to see, hopefully, a large share of the targets that Antonio Brown has left. But you kind of have a flip side to that as well, and that's that he's getting top corner coverage week in and week out, which is always something you got to be wary of. And the fact that teams are all of a sudden going to be game planning more for him as well. So those are kind of the coin flip that I have here. But I do think that he's a very solid pick at late first, early second round, just because that Steelers offense produces year after year, regardless.
Yeah.
Mike, I have him ranked a little bit lower than you. I have him ranked 16th. You have him ranked 10th. But that doesn't say that I actually dislike him. Juju's my wide receiver 6. I like him a lot. Really, the only reason I have him there is because I have him in that wide receiver 2 tier. Not as a wide receiver 2, that second tier of receivers behind Hopkins, Adams, OBJ, and Julio. And I'd rather take a mid-tier or a mid-second tier running back like a Dalvin Cook or a Todd Gurley, both of which we'll get to, over Juju. That's really the only reason I have him a little bit lower. Still like the situation. He's a wide receiver 1. That's the only other concern. We've never seen him as the guy in the offense. So, yeah, that's a positive. He'll get more target share, but it could also be a negative. He's going to get that top corner coverage. So we'll see how that goes. I'm big on Juju. I like him. I like the running backs a little bit more.
And so thinking about Juju, I should explain a little bit of my methodology here as well. So what I use is this projection sheet from a site called Fantasy Football Analytics. Big plug, very helpful, very good. And what they do is they take the projections from I think it's 9 sites across the internet, and they weight them by their success in recent years. So the sites that are better at predictions get higher rating, and the sites that predict worse get a lower weight in their analysis. And they actually have Juju as the receiver with the largest floor, which is essentially the 90 percentile ranking of all of the projections that they've taken. So that's something that's really interesting, because that's basically saying that these analysts are predicting a lot of the highest floor, I should say, for wide receivers, because that's saying that analysts are predicting that with Antonio Brown, that vacuum may even be larger than we think. But I certainly see kind of just the uncertainty of putting him in tier 2 if you consider a little more of the intangible aspect.
Yeah, I see both points. I'm definitely on the Juju Smith-Schuster bandwagon this year. I have him right at 13, so right between you two. I think that the corner coverage is not going to be that big of a deal. He can play anywhere in the field. He can play out of the slot. He can play out wide, both right and left side. So I think he'll get a lot of different corner matchups. And so he won't always have the best opposing corner on him at all times. And he's got a big shoes to fill with Antonio Brown, but I think with Big Ben throwing him the ball, Big Ben's a great quarterback. He threw for 5,000 yards last year. He is a little bit older, but I don't think that'll be too much of a problem for Juju. I think he's a great mid-round 2 guy. Down to another running back. We got Dalvin Cook up next.
Yeah, Dalvin Cook, I mean, the biggest concern here is just the injury risk with Cook. But I see him as the number 1 running back in a very potent offense. And for me, that puts him in this running back tier. I have him higher than Gurley, and that's just because of just the Gurley uncertainty regarding his knee. I also have Mixon in front of Gurley. We can get to that a little later. But I definitely think that Cook is one of the low RB1s in this draft.
Dalvin Cook, in my mind, is the running back version of Odell Beckham Jr. The guy has crazy injury risk. He's only played 13 games since he got drafted 2 years ago. But the guy has as much upside as there is to be RB1 overall as really anyone in the league not named Saquon Barkley. That's 1. And 2, Mike, you said it, the Vikings offense is good. I like what Dalvin Cook does. If you can stay on the field, he's an elite level running back. He's only this low just because of the crazy, crazy injury risk. But if you can stomach that, Dalvin Cook is the running back version of Odell Beckham Jr. You're going to get a great talent as long as he's on the field.
Yeah, I really think Dalvin Cook is actually, I think he's over his injuries. He looked explosive in the preseason. He broke off an 85-yard run on one of his carries. He's going to hit the ground running this year. Obviously a big offense in Minnesota, and I think they brought in Gary Kubiak to help out with their run game. And I do think they're going to be a little bit more run-heavy this year and take some pressure off of Kirk Cousins.
I'm there, man. I hope you're right. I took him last night. I have a lot of shares of Dalvin Cook. I hope he is over those, man. I hope you got it.
Yeah,
right.
I got him in one of my leagues, too. All right, let's move down to Todd Gurley. Big questions here at 15.
Yeah, Todd Gurley, one of the biggest question marks in the draft because when he's on the field, he could be one of the best running backs sort of in the league. I have him, I think, tied with Amer at 16. Bryce a little bit more optimistic at 10. But I think what you have to consider is that late in the Super Bowl, late in the postseason, when the game mattered most and really everything was on the line for the Rams, Todd Gurley was firmly seated on the bench. And that's a big sign there because that's saying that in the most valuable situations, they're putting CJ Anderson, who's currently on, I can't even, got
Lions.
on the Lions. Thank you. He's
Yep.
on the Lions. But that's basically saying he's as replaceable as possible and that these knee concerns are something that we really should be taking seriously. And if you do, and you only project him out to play, say, 10 games worth, or get 10 games worth of carries, that definitely devalues Gurley, even though he has a potential to be a top 5 running back if he's on the field the whole time.
It does. Mike, you said at the outset, I have him ranked 10th, a little bit higher than you guys. I think people got scared off by what CJ Anderson did in the playoffs last year. Todd Gurley is still an elite running back behind the single best offensive line in football. I like him. I don't know how you can't. He was unequivocally the best running back in football, fantasy-wise, until the injury started to happen. The only question mark I have is the fact that Sean McVay, in addition to Sean McVay believes that you should sit all the starters throughout the preseason. He did not play Malcolm Brown. That's the only thing that scares me. He might view Malcolm Brown as a timeshare role. We'll see how that plays out as we get into the season, but Todd Gurley's talent is too good to pass up for the Rams. So I think eventually he'll come around and be that kind of RB1 again.
Yeah, I mean, he's got insane upside. He scored in the past 2 seasons combined. He scored 40 touchdowns, which is just mind-blowing. He's going to get a lot of work, but it is not going to be as much as it has been. And so he's definitely going to regress, which is why we have him down in the teens, in the mid-teens right now. But still, great offense. He is the starting running back, of course, and he's got insane upside. But I just see that there could definitely be some problems with the knee. It could flare up one day, and he could miss a couple weeks. And they could even scale his workload back even more from there if that happens. So there's a little bit of risk with Todd Gurley. So just keep that in mind when you're looking to draft him. But still, top tier upside. So next is Joe Mixon, another running back.
Yeah, Mixon, I projected to be very similar to sort of Dalvin Cook. He's in a slightly worse offense, but he's going to be a little bit more of a bell cow for me. So that kind of is a trade-off and why I have them so similarly ranked. But I think really we got to turn to Bryce for this one, who has him ranked 23, while Amer and I have him 11 and 12 respectively. Bryce, let's hear what the heck you have to say.
Well, thank you, Mike. I am vehemently against Joe Mixon this year. Vehemently. I think that you mentioned he's the bell cow. He is. He was that last year. Didn't live up to his billing. The offensive line, on paper, looks better. In reality, not so much. Jonah Williams, the first-round pick, out for the season. That's the guy that he was going to run behind. I am not. Andy Dalton has shown time and time again he's serviceable, can't get it done. A.J. Green is already out for a couple weeks. I just don't like the offense. I'm not a big fan of Mixon. So, and remember, coming out of college, he did have some off-the-field issues. So that you never know, it could pop up again. That's a little bit out there. I'm just so against Joe Mixon this year because I don't like the offense. I do have him ranked 23rd just because if you can get him in like the third round, early third, really early third, that's a value play. You're getting a bell cow where maybe you're getting guys with more question marks or in timeshares. But I am not a Joe Mixon guy, especially not as a trustworthy RB1.
I mean, he was the 9th best running back last year in terms of fantasy value, and that's behind guys like Melvin Gordon and Todd Gurley, who are much larger question marks than him this year in terms of workload, and obviously Kareem Hunt, who is a much bigger concern on his own. So you're looking at like a running back 6 here, which I think is last year at least, and I think that warrants sort of this top 15 valuation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Michael on this. Joe Mixon, I like him as much as anyone else. I have him at 11, so I have him pretty high. He's in my top 10 running backs. I just think he led the AFC in rushing last year. He played 14 games, so he does miss a couple of games, which is an issue. And I will say the offensive line isn't that great, but he is an amazing talent. He's young. He's going to be one of the focal points of the Cincinnati offense. I think he's a great pick.
And I should say, I have Mixon actually ahead of Chubb, which kind of opens a whole other can of worms here. But I do think that just the value of knowing that Mixon has been in this role before and has done relatively well in it compared to, Chubb, who I feel is a bigger question mark in these first 2 rounds. Obviously, if we're talking later, you can argue for the greater upside. But as of right now, I look Mixon over Chubb.
Yeah, I'm the opposite, but I still love Joe Mixon this year. All right, let's move on to Michael Thomas, wide receiver 6, 17th overall.
Michael Thomas, boys. This one got another. I got a Matthew Berry fact for you coming out right now. The valuable Mr. Roto coming in clutch once again. Do you guys know that Michael Thomas last year caught 85% of his targets, and that was a record by more than 7 percentage points over the next highest person of a season target, which was I believe 78 point something percent.
This is NFL history, right?
NFL history, yeah. I just don't see anyone kind of overtaking that mark, and that's why I have him below sort of my first tier of wide receivers and also my second tier running backs. It's just because I don't think that's necessarily repeatable, and there's just a lot of room for aggression right there.
Mike, I actually did know that he caught 85% of his passes because I also listen to Mr. Roto. It's a great stat. Yeah, it is a crazy mark. I think it's replicable. It's a passing league now, so even if it's a lower percent, his yards might still go up. And honestly, never ever count out Drew Brees. Drew Brees made Marcus Colston a star. Marcus Colston was a 6th-round pick. I'm a big Michael Thomas guy. I have him ranked 12th overall. That's ahead of guys. That's ahead of Juju. It's ahead of Devontae Adams. I'm big on Michael Thomas. Love the Saints offense. So I do think that 85%, while it's a gaudy number, could happen again.
Yeah, see, I'm going to do what you just told me not to. I'm going to count out Drew Brees. Not actually, but I do think I see some Drew Brees regression coming. Late last season, he was not the best. He's not as good as he's always been. And I think that Michael Thomas's numbers are going to reflect that a little bit. And I kind of see Michael Thomas and Julio Jones kind of in the same light. I think they're great at getting receptions, great at yards, but their touchdowns aren't always there. I think just behind some of these other guys that we've already mentioned, I think a lot of them have a much higher touchdown upside than Michael Thomas. Speaking of a guy with high touchdown upside, let's move on to the next guy, Tyreek Hill.
Tyreek Hill, I think we all have him ranked relatively similarly within the same, 4 slots. Kansas City obviously has that great offense, but Hill is always just sort of that big play variability, which kind of brings him solidly into this wide receiver 2 tier, whereas if he was much more consistent, I could easily see him being a sort of in the wide receiver 1 tier.
Mike, I'm with you. Basically, the reason I'm down on Tyreek Hill is just because I'm not a big boomer bust guy. I'd rather go with a guy that I know I'm going to get some kind of consistent play out of. That was my mistake last year, actually. I was very down on Tyreek Hill, but he did show to be a great fantasy asset. Last year, just throw out another stat, 17 yards per reception. It's a crazy number. A lot of those are air yards because Mahomes can flat out throw the football. Tyreek he's a polarizing guy, polarizing player. He'll be a good fantasy asset.
Yeah, for me, Tyreek Hill's just got that touchdown upside that I'm looking for with these top-tier wide receivers. He's obviously the number 1 in the best offense in the NFL. I think he really stepped up his game last year with Patrick Mahomes taking over for Alex Smith. I think with Patrick Mahomes firmly in place in this Chiefs offense and Andy Reid, I think he's just going to be amazing. He's going to be really good. And that's a stack you definitely want if you can get it. Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, best stack in fantasy football this year.
Yeah, I'm not a big stack guy, but if I were to stack, it would be those guys. It'd be those guys or Baker OBJ. I actually have that stack in one league. I'm with you on that. If you're going to stack 2 high upside guys.
And I think a big question kind of here for anybody in fantasy is who are you taking of these 3 guys that we have ranked here very similarly in Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, and Mike Evans? Because if you're a little bit more kind of risk-loving, you turn towards Tyreek Hill and willing to take fluctuations on a week-to-week basis. But if you're, I think, looking for a more solid play, you kind of want to turn towards Evans here. Whereas I think Thomas is more of a regression candidate, but I do have him ranked in between the two. I think they're all sort of I could see anyone taking either one of them, but I also see reasons for going towards one as opposed to the other, depending on how you've been drafting so far. If you're looking at a high risk so far, I could see you going for an Evans or a Thomas over a Hill.
Yeah. Mike, that's actually a good segue. We have Evans next. Amir, you want to move on?
Yeah, sure. Mike Evans, great receiver. He's a physical guy. He's going to be catching a lot of passes from Jameis Winston, who is not the best NFL quarterback, but for fantasy, he can really support some gaudy wide receiver numbers. I like Mike Evans a lot this year. I think with Bruce Arians there, they're going to really just air it out. Not much run game. So I think they're really going to only have one option, and that's to throw. So I'm pretty high on Mike Evans this year.
I'm with you. Love Mike Evans. You mentioned the run game. No run game. Big positive for him. Even a bigger positive, no defense. They're going to throw, play from behind. That defense made Ryan Fitzpatrick look like an elite quarterback last season.
For about 4 games.
Mike Evans is going to be a beneficiary. For 3 games. Games. But Mike Evans is going to be a beneficiary of working now with Jameis Winston for a full season and just a bad defense.
No, I totally agree there. I think that, I don't know what you guys would say, but I would say that Evans is probably the most consistent of, or at least has the highest floor of Thomas, Hill, and himself. What would you guys say?
I think it's Thomas just because of the catch percentage that you went with. Also, the other options receiver-wise, or receiving options in New Orleans are limited. Behind Michael Thomas is going to be Jared Cook, kind of a washed-up tight end, and Traquan Smith. I like him as a late-round flyer, late-round sleeper, but you don't know. Mike Evans does have to contend with Chris Godwin, who's a very popular slot target, and O.J. Howard, who I happen to love. So I would say Thomas's floor is a little bit higher just because of target share.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I read a stat that said Michael Thomas in all 3 years in the league, he's been a wide receiver 7 or better. I think that's the floor you're looking for. All right, so let's move on down to another running back at 20th overall. We got Aaron Jones.
Yeah, Aaron Jones, just the running back for the Packers is always an interesting spot because you would think that offense is just going to kind of get rushing yards. But over the past few years, that hasn't necessarily been the case. And I don't know, Jones is kind of one of those starting running backs that makes you a little bit kind of queasy when picking him just because you're never quite sure how much the Packers are going to rely on the running game. But with that in mind, he is a starting running back in the NFL on a team with a very good offense. So that's why I think you have him sort of in the top half of running backs in the league.
Mike, I'm actually really high on him. Of the 3 of us, you guys have him at 23. I have him inside my top 20 at 19. I think Aaron Jones' upside is crazy high. Finally, last year, they got rid of Ty Montgomery, the deadline to Baltimore. They finally stopped giving the ball to Jamal Williams. And Aaron Jones took off. In just 12 games last year, Aaron Jones had 728 rushing yards. 728. That's 60.7 yards per game. For a guy that didn't play, in the preseason, didn't go to camp, I like him a lot. I also like the upgrade from Mike McCarthy to Matt LaFleur as a play caller, as a coach. So I'm very high on Aaron Jones this year as a potential RB1. That comes with some risk when you draft him.
Yeah, I like Aaron Jones as well this year. Great offense. He's definitely the number 1 guy. It's just a new offense, which is a little bit scary for running backs, which is why he's a little bit lower. And also, he does have some injury history. At the end of last year, he had an MCL injury, and coming into this season or coming into training camp, he was dealing with a hamstring injury, which is always a tough thing to get over, especially early in the season. So those are a little bit concerning, but I still think he's going to be great, especially if Matt LaFleur decides that it's his ball and it's his backfield to work with. All right, next up we have the first tight end off the board for us at 21st overall. We have Travis Kelce.
Yeah, I mean, Kelce, he's just for me a big regression candidate, and that's why I have him ranked lower than I think you two, because at this point in the draft, I don't know if I really feel comfortable going out of the way and not picking a wide receiver or a running back. especially when sort of the risk is just this high for someone repeating the previous season, which was basically a record-breaking season, but a record-breaking season for a tight end, I should say. I don't think you can necessarily predict that that's going to happen again. And you at the tight end position, you have like George Kittle, for example, who was a tight end 18, I believe, heading into the draft last year, and he wound up being obviously one of the best tight ends in the league. So I think that there is sort of the variability at the position, and also the fact that I just see that Kelsey to be a huge regression candidate. People are predicting him to sort of have the same year as last year in terms of fantasy points, which I just don't necessarily think is a fair assessment. Because I do expect a bit of regression from the Chiefs' offense, and if you bake that sort of hype into the ADP, you're always going to want to just kind of think twice before taking any of those players.
Yeah, so for me, I have Kelsey ranked 20th on there. I think you do too. So here, at least for me, we have a case of I have him ranked 20th because I do think he is, a top 25, top 20 player in this league in fantasy, but I wouldn't draft him there. For me, yeah, he's got the numbers. I think that tight ends, it was crazy variance last year. Tight ends, in terms of points per week, were harder to predict than kickers, which is unbelievable. So I think that's going to come back to earth. I actually really like those mid-tier tight ends this year. Your O.J. Howards, your Evan Ingrams, your David Njoku's. I'm actually really high on Austin Hooper, too, in the Atlanta offense. So Travis Kelce, love the talent situation. He is here in this kind of top 25 area, but I actually wouldn't draft him in that area.
I see that, and I also think that if you're going to jump early on a tight end, I would prefer to jump for those guys and come around like 5 or round 6 as opposed to jumping early in round 3, because you're risking much more in taking a round 2 or 3 jump as opposed to a round 5 or 6 jump.
Exactly. So like Travis Kelce, I've seen him go no later than the middle of the second round. Would you rather have Travis Kelce wasting a premium pick or O.J. Howard, who you can get in that kind of mid-5th round area? Exactly. That's kind of where he's been going. So that's what I've been thinking about. Same thing with Evan Ingram. So this here is just kind of, at least for me, it sounds like for you too, Mike, a disparity between who the player is and how you're going to draft.
Yeah, 100% agree. He's a great talent, best offense in the NFL. Obviously, he's got Patrick Mahomes, and he's clearly the best tight end. And he gives you such a premium over the other guys. I think he's worth a top 25 pick. But saying that, tight ends are a little bit more variable, and there is some depth when you get down into 3, 4, 5, 6. You can definitely get some solid guys down there. And at his ADP, I don't think I would take him, but he's still top tier option.
While we're on tight ends, just a quick little plug. Mike, you mentioned George Kittle was going as tight end 18 last year, and he shows up as tight end 2. Another guy, just keep your eye on, Jeff Swain. Jeff Swain was now the starting tight end in Jacksonville. Nick Foles targets tight ends more than any other quarterback in the league. If you're looking at a guy that could possibly move up there, Jeff Swain. So you're seeing guys now way down the board who have that kind of potential. Just moving into this whole idea about, how do we value a tight end?
Yeah, up here at 20, I'm definitely more comfortable with taking a running back or wide receiver. And that being said, let's move down to Antonio Brown at wide receiver 9, 22nd overall.
Oh, Antonio Brown, I have ranked the lowest of us, but we're all kind of tightly packed, 21 to 25. I think he's in moving to Oakland and in this sort of different offense. I obviously think that he drops out of the first round, kind of obviously one of the top 3 wide receivers in the game, to sort of this lower tier. And I really see no reason why you should take him anywhere before kind of a late second rounder, because the upside really isn't worth the risk. And you're, like I said, at this point, this is kind of towards the end of looking for those guys with a solid floor. In this totally different situation, I don't think you can necessarily trust Antonio Brown's floor all that much at all. And his upside isn't the same upside that he had in previous years with the Steelers.
Mike, I'm with you. I'm just down on him. You got an offense downgrade and you got a quarterback downgrade. Just not an Antonio Brown guy this year.
Yeah, he's had a lot of storylines coming into camp. He had the foot stuff. He had the helmet stuff. And so there's that. But I do think once he gets on the field, he's going to produce. I think it's still Antonio Brown. He's been putting up historic, like best wide receiver of all time, almost numbers for the past couple of years. So he's still an extremely talented guy and does make it within my top 10 wide receivers. I just think, like you guys said, worse quarterback, worse offense. And that's why he's a little bit lower than he has been in past years. Moving down to another wide receiver, we have Keenan Allen at wide receiver 10.
Yeah, Keenan Allen. I mean, when Keenan Allen's always on my draft boards, I never seem to really kind of jump for him. I did last year, and I just felt that he's just not a player that I kind of gravitate towards, just because, I mean, the Chargers don't necessarily have that kind of electric offense. They always have that solid factor there with Rivers under center. But I just kind of see Allen as being this sort of solid second-tier receiver that, yeah, he can give you a decent floor, but I just don't necessarily kind of gravitate towards Keenan Allen. For some reason, I have him like lower than you guys, but so would love to hear your thoughts.
Mike, I'm with you. I don't gravitate towards him, but I can just tell you, I think I can tell you why. And that's because Keenan Allen's boring. Keenan Allen is not Odell Beckham Jr. He's not going to wow you with these unbelievable catches. Or Julio last year, that 300-yard week. That might have been 2 years ago, actually. No, Amari Cooper, same thing. You know what you're getting with Keenan Allen, but that's sometimes what you want, especially out of a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Keenan Allen and the next guy on our board, Adam Thielen, these guys in my mind are very, very similar. You know what you're going to get. So if you're looking for a safer option, I'm a big Keenan Allen guy, especially now that Melvin Gordon has said he's going to sit out week 1 at a bare minimum. They're going to throw.
Yeah, I mean, Keenan Allen's never been the sexiest of wide receivers. No homo. But I think he's a solid guy, like you guys said. He's got a good quarterback behind him. And without Melvin Gordon, they're definitely going to lose a passing option out of the backfield that way. So I think he's going to get a lot of targets. I think he's a top 10 wide receiver. We got him ranked up there. I think he's going to be solid. And as Bryce said, we're moving on to Adam Thielen, who's a little bit similar. Not as much upside, but you pretty much know what you're getting every week.
Yeah, the projections for Thielen sort of are actually, according to the analyst numbers, he has a slightly lower floor but a higher upside, which I agree with, just because that offense is a bit more dynamic in that if they're really good at Thielen is seeing more targets than Diggs, sort of substantially more, then he really can be a very, very, very solid wide receiver 1. But if not, you're sort of pulling him into this wide receiver 2 camp. And this is sort of the point where, once again, you're asking yourself in your draft, do I want more risk, or so far are my picks kind of stable where I could have a little bit more of an appetite for risk? Because if you're looking for a little bit more risk, you could definitely go the Thielen route, but if not, you could go and turn towards Allen.
Yeah, Mike, I'm with you. And you said your projections are a little bit lower floor, a little bit higher ceiling. I agree, and I think the reason for that is, well, one, the presence of Stephon Diggs. Not many teams can really boast having a 1A and 1B wide receiver. Both of these guys would be an absolute wide receiver 1 just on any other team. So that already there is going to take away. And as we mentioned before, Dalvin Cook is there and healthy for now. If he stays healthy, they're going to run more. That's just a fact. The one thing that I do like about Adam Thielen more than, let's say, Keenan Allen, who we just mentioned, for some reason, it didn't carry over from Washington. Kirk Cousins doesn't target Kyle Rudolph much. Hunter Henry in Los Angeles, he's coming back. I like him as a talent. Phillip Rivers could target him more. So if you're looking at these two guys in pair again, like we've been talking about, Adam Thielen definitely has less going. Adam Thielen has less against him, just in terms of target share, because Mike Williams is going to take some too, especially in the red zone in Los Angeles. But Adam Thielen has that higher upside if Dalvin Cook goes down again.
Yeah, I mean, a little concerning thing with Adam Thielen is just his finish to the season. Obviously, he started with those, I think, 8 or 9 100-yard games in a row, which is historic, but he did trail off at the end of the season. It looked like Kirk Cousins was looking for Stephon Diggs a little bit more. But I still think Adam Thielen's top 12 wide receiver still got good floor, great upside. I think he's a great player to take at mid-third round. All right, next we have a guy that is plummeting down draft boards, Damian Williams at 25th overall.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a little bit of egg on my face because I think I have him at 20 here on our rankings, which we made these just before the news today, which is that he and LaShawn McCoy will basically be splitting carries down there in Kansas City, and I think we should kind of reorient our conversation to talk about that in terms of Williams,
Yep,
because now
100%.
I don't know where I'm comfortable taking him, and I think that the odds are in a draft at this point, somebody's going to be higher on Williams than you. So I would kind of always shy away towards picking him at this point, just because whenever someone is picking, they'll probably view him as higher than you at that moment, just because they really, I mean, they probably have heard the news, but they might be viewing it differently than you. For me, I don't really feel comfortable taking him until like the 5th or 6th round, where we're starting to sort of make those kind of big high upside picks.
Mike, I'm actually a little bit lower than you are on him now. I'm already lower on the rankings, but with this news, I probably won't even touch him until the 7th or 8th. I see him as a low-end running back 3. He is going to split those carries, and there is the concern of Darwin Thompson. He got a lot of buzz around camp. Let's also remember, yeah, it's an Andy Reid offense, but when you have Patrick Mahomes, you're going to throw the ball. LaShawn McCoy is a better receiving back, so that's going to eat into Damian Williams' receptions, not only eating into his carries. So I don't know what's going to happen. Right now, I have him low end wide receiver, running back 3 with some upside should the offense reveal itself in week 1.
Yeah, he definitely has some upside along with LaShawn McCoy. But I really think I'm with Mike. I think he's a 5th, 6th round guy for me. It's tough when you have a running back by committee to really stand out and to really live up to an ADP of in the 20s or the 30s. So he's definitely falling down draft boards. But he is still going to be fantasy relevant, definitely a flex option most weeks. And if anything happens to LaShawn McCoy, he will jump into the easily top 15 running back category. So let's move on to another running back, a little bit clearer in this case, Kerryon Johnson.
Yeah, Kerryon Johnson is sort of in the same, I want to say the same camp as Adam Jones a little bit, where he's sort of the number 1 running back on a team that has a decent offense, but doesn't necessarily run the ball much. The Lions were 23rd in rushing yards last year, but what is more appealing is that he is probably going to be rather a bit of a force in the passing game this year. Last year, you sort of had that 2-headed dragon behind him of Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick. And now it's just CJ Anderson and Bowden behind Johnson, which I think makes him a bit more appealing.
I like Kerryon Johnson. I perennially make the mistake of drafting a Lion running back. I did it with Javid Best. I did it with Amir Abdullah. And it didn't work out for me. I like Kerryon Johnson more than all of them. I had him last year. Fortunately, I had to start him on a bye week when he had the 100-yard performance. That being said, I don't know about Kerryon Johnson. I see him, like Mike, you were talking about Damian Williams. Somebody's going to be higher on him than you. I'm the same way. I had one draft where Kerryon Johnson went in the 1st round. I'm not going to take him there. I don't dislike the talent. I'm not sure I trust the Lions running back. I do like him better than the other Lions running backs, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem with him is going to be just the Lions offense. I don't know that they're that good. I mean, they do have a good quarterback, but offensive line's not too great, and they haven't shown much promise last year or in this preseason. So I'm not a huge fan of the Lions offense, which is why I think Kerryon Johnson's a little bit lower for me. But I do like his workload a lot. He can really take over that job, and he'll have the number 1 running back spot in Detroit. Next on our ranking, we have at 27 and running back 15, Leonard Fournette from the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, I have Leonard Fournette down as my running back 13. I think there's 3 points that need to be addressed when we're talking about Fournette. 2 good, 1 bad. 2 good. First, Jaguars were 13th in rushing attempts last year, which I think is very promising. And Fournette was a running back 8 in 2017 in half PPR scoring. So with that in mind, I think there's definitely the opportunity for a very, very, very high upside with Fournette. And he's also seems to be the leader, the clear lead back there, barring any injury. But of course, barring any injury is really a very important statement when it comes to Fournette, because he was riddled by the injury bug all of last year, and for that I have to say that that his backup Armstead is probably a very important handcuff if you do wind up drafting Fournette.
Yeah, Mike, you on our rankings are a little bit higher on Fournette than me and Amer. Amer, you have him at 30. I have him at 31. Mike, you got him at 21. So for me, Fournette becomes my RB17. I'm just scared by the injury. He missed almost the entire season last year. He got a slight upgrade at quarterback with Nick Foles, so they could potentially be passing more. D.D. Westbrook, I do anticipate is going to take another step forward. They do get Marquise Lee back. So there are more weapons, and I do know that the Jacksonville brass likes Raekwon Armstead. So who knows if he's going to take some touches away. I'm just a little bit lower on Fournette, mostly because of the injury risk and the potential for the team and that offense to improve in the passing game.
Yeah, I'm definitely with Bryce on this one. I think his workload is going to be there. He's going to get a lot of touches, and I don't think I'm too concerned about his backups. But I think the biggest thing with Leonard Fournette is just his lack of efficiency. For his career, he has a 3.7 yards per carry, which is very low and really not what you want from one of these running backs. And so I think that given his past and his efficiency in the past, along with his injury concerns, I'm not too high on him. I don't love Leonard Fournette this year. And so next up, we have another running back, Chris Carson.
Yeah, Chris Carson. Honestly, I have him ranked lowest on. I think of all of us. Amer, you have him at 21. Bryce has him at 34, and I have him at 36. He is somewhat attractive in that he is going to be the leading back for Seattle. But Seattle, I mean, you always have to wonder exactly how much of how effective their passing game is going to be and how much that'll play into Chris Carson. I believe that last year he was up against a stacked box, I think 57% of the time, which is just an astronomical number. And he did quite well against it. But now, I mean, you're losing Doug Baldwin, which is a big question mark, I think. It just in general makes their offense a much bigger question mark, which is something that's really scary. And quite honestly, like the projections have him, his floor is, I think, the fifth lowest of all running backs that I ranked in my top 50.
Yeah, Mike, I'm with you there. I know a lot of people in the industry are drinking the Chris Carson Kool-Aid. I'm just not. Everyone knows that Seattle's a run-first team. Mike, you said 57% stacked box. I don't think that's going to change. Also, Russell Wilson last season set a career low in full season pass attempts. He now has DK Metcalf there, who was just listed as a week 1 starter, so he is healthy. I think they're going to pass more, and they're looking for Rashad Penny to take a step forward. Don't forget, he was a first-round pick last year, so they did invest a lot of draft capital in the man from San Diego State.
Yeah, I'm definitely not with you guys on this one. I'm totally drinking the Chris Carson Kool-Aid this year. I think he's going to be huge. I think he has top 5 running back upside. Seattle's a team that runs a ton. They ran, I think, over 500 times last year over the whole season. And with the departure of Mike Davis, who opens up about 150 touches, I think Chris Carson's going to be just fine. Even if Rashad Penny comes up a little bit, I think Chris Carson's going to be just fine. Last year, he had 1,150 yards and he had 9 touchdowns, even though he missed a couple games. And so I think I'm all in on Chris Carson, especially at his ADP where he's at. I love him this year. Next up, we have another running back. Again, Devontae Freeman.
Yeah, Freeman. I mean, he's on this Falcons offense, which Bryce has called electric previously. But I mean, while their passing game is quite good, you have to realize they were 30th in rushing attempts last year, which is kind of a big question mark. It's something you really have to consider if you do try to pick up Freeman. But he is the leading rusher there, which is always something it's good to think about. I have him the highest of all of us on our rankings, just because of the fact that he is a leading rusher on an offense that will probably be definitely competing in a lot of games, so you don't have sort of total game script against Freeman. So with that, they probably will be rushing the ball a good amount, and you also have, if their passing game is so good, they can sort of they can play around with getting some surprise runs at these defenses.
Yeah, I have him significantly lower than both of you guys. I have him at 38th overall, my RB20 in the running back category. Part of this, I was burned by Devontae Freeman last year, took him as my RB2. But that aside, it is a crowded backfield in there. You got Ito Smith taking over the Tevin Coleman role that was vacated when he went to San Francisco. But also, I've been hearing a lot of chatter about Brian Hill, a rookie that they have, undrafted rookie, I believe. Brian Hill's been talked about as a potential force in that backfield should the opportunity arise. Plus, this is going to be a pass-first offense, and Ito Smith definitely seems much more like the passing option out of the backfield. I'm a little bit lower on Devontae Freeman than both of you, but if you can get him at value, he is the number one back in, as I said, an electric offense.
Yeah, I mean, just things going for Devontae Freeman. He's a solid running back. He's the clear number one guy in a good offense. And I don't really think that Ito Smith poses much of a threat on Devontae Freeman's workload this year, especially with Tevin Coleman clearing out to San Francisco. I think Devontae Freeman has a clear path to be the number one running back in this offense. But I do think the biggest concern with Devontae Freeman is his health. He had a lot of issues last year. I drafted him as well, Bryce, and he did burn me and burn my fantasy team last year, which was not a great experience. But I think between running backs 15 and 20, I think he's a solid pick to grab down there.
Don't get me wrong with that one. Devontae Freeman is going to be good at value. And that is in that kind of RB 15 to 20 area. I have him in that low end. But if you can get him at value, he's a good pick. I'm just not a fan of drafting him as your RB2. We have him ranked there just because that's what he is. So you take on some risk, but if you can get him lower down there, like at his RB20 overall, that's definite value for him.
Yeah, his ADP right now is right around 31, so that is right a little bit lower than I have him ranked. So I'd say around there, 31, 35, around that range would be a pretty solid spot to get Devontae Freeman for me. All right, so moving on to a wide receiver, we have Amari Cooper up next.
Yeah, Amari Cooper obviously spending his first full season with the Cowboys, which is people have a few different opinions on it. I apparently have the lowest. I have him ranked 38th overall. I sort of have him in this tier with Diggs, Edelman. With Diggs and Edelman, there's sort of a big drop off even in our consensus rankings between Thielen, who's the wide receiver 11, and Cooper, who's the wide receiver 12. And for me, if I'm choosing between Cooper and Edelman, I always tend to kind of lean Edelman. And that's just because if you are in a PPR, half PPR league, I think Edelman will probably see more targets. And analysts do seem to suggest that Edelman has the higher floor with basically an identical ceiling to Cooper. So I usually lean Edelman if we get to this point in the draft, but I do see that kind of, if you're in this sort of 3 wide receiver tier that we're looking at, or not necessarily 3, just as in there are 3 wide receivers in this tier, I lean Edelman and then Cooper.
Mike, I'm actually with you, but also a little different. I have Cooper, Diggs, and Edelman also in this tier, but I have them all about 12 picks higher than you do. Mm-hmm. So I have Cooper at 30, you have him at 38. Diggsy I have at 29, and Edelman at 25. So I'm with you, definitely leaning Julian Edelman. I like Diggs a little more than Cooper. Mm-hmm. To me, Amari Cooper, he's Amari Cooper. You know what you're going to get. He's a boom or bust guy. He could break off 300, or he could go 3 weeks of silence. I am not a Dak Prescott fan. So to me, that is a knock. I love Julian Edelman this year. He's the wide receiver 1 in that offense. Great offense in New England. Plus, N'Keal Harry just went down on the IR. Minimum 8 weeks. So it's going to free up some targets. Also, Tom Brady's arm strength. We saw some videos. It's going to decline a little bit. And Edelman is good for those short yard plays. So if you're looking at those guys, I'm definitely Edelman, Diggs, Cooper. But now thinking about Cooper a little bit more, higher on him than you are, but still down on him in this group.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you guys. I think Amari Cooper as soon as he kind of hit the ground running with the Cowboys, after his first game, he was electric with the Cowboys. I think Dak is better than most people give him credit for. I don't really think Dak has had a real number one receiver in his career yet, and I think Amari Cooper really fills that role. I think once and if Ezekiel Elliott signs, I think this Cowboys offense is going to be really good. I think Amari Cooper is going to be a great player here. I think his boomer bust days are behind him. I think he's going to be a lot more consistent this year. As for the other two, I do think that Julian Edelman gives you the highest floor out of these three guys. He's going to get you a lot of receptions, a lot of yards. I just think that his touchdown upside is significantly lower than Cooper and Diggs. And touchdowns just matter so much, in my opinion. And so I think that I do have Edelman third out of in this tier, starting with Amari Cooper. Then I have Stephon Diggs. So I think they're all great options for a wide receiver 2, between like wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 15. But I do like Amari Cooper the most, just because I think the Cowboys offense is going to be pretty good this year. And another thing on Julian Edelman, I think I would have had him higher earlier in the year, but just with Josh Gordon coming back, I think he's going to get a lot of targets straight out of the gate.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And I think something to point out about this tier in general is that it kind of depends on where you are in terms of your own draft, if you're thinking through which of these three guys to take. And that's just because if you're looking for a higher risk play, I think you're looking more Cooper Diggs, whereas if you're just looking for a kind of a receiver who you know is going to get targets in a PPR league, I think that's when you kind of turn towards Edelman with sort of a higher floor than the other two.
And as for Stephon Diggs, he definitely took an uptick at the end of last season, so maybe he'll continue that, and he definitely has the upside to be a top 10 wide receiver this year. So moving on from those three, we're going into the tight ends. We have Zach Ertz and George Kittle back-to-back. Zach Ertz at tight end 2, George Kittle at tight end 3.
Yeah, I mean, I have them ranked the highest on our list of all of us. I have Ertz at 30 and Kittle at 31. I don't know if that's necessarily representative of how I think of them. I very rarely would draft a tight end this early. I just kind of have them. I kind of just sandwich them into this tier here, because it's all sort of this is sort of a personal preference call. Where if you look at like the value over replacement, this is the point where you would draft these tight ends. But I feel that it's much more kind of golden to go for. A much more sure thing to go for a running back wide receiver in this slot. So I think it's just kind of personal preference as to whether you want to select a tight end at this point. But talking specifically about Ertz and Kittle, I look at Ertz as kind of someone on a very high-powered offense in Philadelphia, obviously led by Carson Wentz. And that's why I have him above Kittle, who isn't necessarily as strong of a play because his offense, I think, is just much weaker. And like we said earlier, he was the tight end 18 going into last year. So there definitely isn't sort of the Kittle had a boom year last year, but it's very possible that he comes back with a bust year this year.
Yeah, Mike, I'm with you on that. I have Zach Ertz at 35 overall, George Kittle at 42. Ertz is going to give you a floor. I think you know what you're going to get. Tight end in general is somewhat touchdown dependent. Ertz is that kind of guy. I think George Kittle is primed for regression, maybe more than any other player in the draft. Also, what scares me a little bit about Kittle is he hasn't really worked with Jimmy G yet. He's only worked with Nick Mullins. While Jimmy G is an upgrade, we don't know how that's going to play out. And the other thing that I'm on with you here is just I have him ranked here, wouldn't necessarily draft him here. Also, we talked about this with Kelsey. There's other value later on. But more importantly than that, I have not been in a draft yet where Ertz and Kittle have made it past the end of the second round, significantly higher than how all three of us have them ranked. So this might come down to opportunity and just won't get a lot of shares.
Yeah, I think where these guys are being drafted is a little bit high. I do have George Kittle at 31, and his ADP is at 30. So I'm not too far off, but I do think that this is a pretty high premium to pay for these guys. If Kittle drops a little bit further, I would definitely grab him. But I am lower on Zach Ertz than I am on George Kittle this year. I just think they're not going to throw to the tight end as much just because there's so many weapons in Philadelphia. I think his receptions and his touchdowns are both going to regress. And that's also obviously going to be the case with George Kittle after his insane year last year. But I think George Kittle is more likely to regress less than Zach Ertz just because all those targets are still kind of up for grabs in San Francisco. There hasn't really been one pass catcher in San Francisco that's really stood out among the rest besides George Kittle. So I like him over Zach Ertz, but they're both great tight ends, although you're probably not going to get them unless you're really willing to reach for them. All right, so moving on to Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods. We can do these guys back-to-back, both LA Rams, both wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, the real question here is how much do you feel that one of them is going to get targeted over the other? Last year, we had Woods leading all Rams receivers with 130 targets, and Cooks was second with 117. So they definitely have comparable target numbers. But the really key thing to look at there is that Kupp was fourth with 55 targets, but he's coming back from a major injury last year. So he's going to play a much more pertinent role in the offense. And I think you have to keep that in mind as a fantasy owner, that may cut into the target share of Cooks and Woods a little bit. But I definitely do think they are borderline wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 options, both of them for sure. Yeah, definitely. Bryce, what are your thoughts?
I definitely view them as wide receiver 1, at least Brandon Cooks. Robert Woods, I see more as a wide receiver 2. I am much, much higher on Brandon Cooks than both of you guys. I have him at 26 overall. I'm higher on Brandon Cooks than a lot of people. Couple reasons for that. I mean, for me anyway, Brandon Cooks has never finished a season lower than wide receiver 13, and yet he's being drafted as a kind of mid-tier wide receiver 2 when he's a fringe wide receiver 1. Jared Goff, I think, is going to take a step forward. If Todd Gurley isn't as healthy as we're hoping, they might pass more. But really, for me, the kicker is he's the deep guy. Brandon Cooks, his yards per target was 10.3, and Robert Woods was almost a full yard less, coming in at 9.4 last year. So, to me, Cooks has that kind of deep threat upside that Kupp and Woods don't necessarily have as much in this offense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't think it's any question that Brandon Cooks has a much higher upside than both Robert Woods, and if we want to lump in Cooper Kupp here. But I just think that the floor that Robert Woods gives you is just insanely high. Last year, he was just one of the most consistent wide receivers. I think I read that he was a top 5 wide receiver in terms of consistency in finishing within the top 20 wide receivers on a week-per-week basis. So I think that floor is extremely important, especially when you're drafting these wide receivers between the 15 and wide receiver 20. I think that floor is something that you can't really find anywhere else in these picks when you're talking about wide receivers. So I think Robert Woods is a great option. I really like Robert Woods this year. I have him definitely higher than Brandon Cooks.
I do just want to really quick clarify. Robert Woods, still a great option. I know I was talking down a little bit. That's really just more how I feel about Brandon Cooks being so high. Robert Woods, Amer, definitely agree with you. He is that high floor option. And like what Mike was talking about, with drafting Edelman versus Cooper, it is going to come down to how much risk you want to take and how your draft is going. Definitely like both of them, though.
Yeah, both of them clearly really good receivers on a great offense, solid quarterback. I think they'll both have good seasons. So let's move down to number 37 overall, David Montgomery.
Yeah, David Montgomery, people seem to be really high on him, which is why I have him ranked much lower than you two. It's just because, I mean, you have to look at the upside that he has here. We're in Chicago where they want to go with this two-headed running back system with Montgomery and Tariq Cohen. So that already knocks Montgomery down to this. He's not going to be a bell cow. He's not going to be someone who's there every down because we do have the pass-catching Cohen. So that in a half PPR league is obviously something you really want to consider before drafting Montgomery. But aside from that, I definitely see the upside there, but I don't think at this point in the draft you want to put as much risk into like a Montgomery pick, just because he's a rookie, and I could see it going kind of very poorly in Cohen taking a lot more touches than people are currently thinking. I know that the Bears have said that they want to downplay Cohen's role a little bit, but that was sort of a unclear statement because it's kind of also referred to his special teams and the fact that he was taking a lot of the rushing touches away from their other running back at the end of the other running back Jordan Howard, who's now at Philadelphia at the end of last year.
So, Mike, here's where we're going to disagree just a little bit. I have him ranked almost twice as high as you do. I am incredibly high on David Montgomery. I have him at 27. You have him at 53. To me, David Montgomery is playing in a run. I view them as a run-first offense. I mean, you mentioned Jordan Howard. Last year, Jordan Howard was an RB2, fringe RB1 some weeks. So the Tariq Cohen doesn't really scare me too much. But even more than that, also, David Montgomery is a better talent than Jordan Howard, significantly. Other than that, the one thing that I love about the Bears is the defense. Trubisky's only going to have to lead an offense to maybe one touchdown a week, one touchdown and a field goal, and they're going to win. That defense is unbelievable. Game script is going to lend itself to the ground. They're going to run more than people think. And I think David Montgomery is primed on volume alone to have a great season. I even took him over Chris Carson in one league. So I'm definitely very high on David Montgomery this season.
Yeah, I'm going to have to split the difference between you two guys. I have David Montgomery just inside my top 40. I have him at 39. I have to disagree with Bryce and say I would definitely, 10 times out of 10, take Chris Carson over David Montgomery. But I still think David Montgomery is a solid mid-tier RB2. I think he's going to get a lot of work in Chicago. I think that from what I'm hearing in camp, they are loving him, loving how he's doing. He's going to be the starting running back, and I think by the end of the year, he could become a 3-down back. I think he's got that much talent. I think the Bears are really looking for him to take the reins, and a lot of the offense, I think, is going to go through him by the end of the season.
So you really see him taking it to Cohen's target share by the end of the year?
I do. Amir, if you don't mind if I jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I do. I also think Mike Davis is going to have a bit of a role. Montgomery's a way better football player, way better athlete than Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard was almost useless as a pass catcher. David Montgomery is going to take that away from Tariq Cohen. He's bigger than Tariq Cohen. He's one of the bigger backs in the league. I believe he's coming in at 5'10", 5'11", 220. Tariq Cohen he's the human joystick, a little bit smaller. He can handle that kind of load. I think at some point it's going to become Montgomery's backfield.
I just don't see it happening because Cohen, I mean, last year alone, he was second on the team in just receiving yards. And I think he's basically among the top 3 in receptions, but it was really splitting a hair between him and Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel as to who had the most targets. They all had over 90 targets last year. So I think that they do respect Cohen's pass catching ability. So I really don't expect that to fade. And that I think is kind of where we vary in our rankings.
Yeah, I think with this team and this offense, it's tough to really see what's going to play out for the season. I think it's one of the toughest teams to really figure out in terms of the offense. So I get Mike's concerns, and I think his floor isn't that high, but I think his ceiling is sky high. So that's why I got him inside my top 40. All right, so moving on, we have Philip Lindsay.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel it's a very interesting. I have no idea how the Denver offense is going to be this year. The floor is very low, in my opinion, and so that's why I think all of us are kind of. We don't necessarily have a Bronco in our top. Our top 35 here, and that's just because you really don't know if the ball is going to move, first of all, and then second, if it does move, who exactly is going to be there. I mean, Lindsey was the number 1 back last year, but you always have Royce Freeman also coming out of that backfield, and it's always difficult dealing with this running back by committee week over week, especially if we're talking like 3rd round, 4th round. You don't want to have to figure out whether or not you're going to pencil this guy in every week. So that's why I tend to shy away from Lindsey in my drafts, but I mean, he does have a very high upside if everything goes well in Denver, but that's a big if.
Yeah, Mike, I'm with you. Drafting Phil Lindsay as an RB2 just makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm splitting the difference between the two of you. I have him at RB40. Not RB40, 40 overall. The back end of the RB2 range. It just makes me uncomfortable. He's good, but he's not going to explode most weeks. I do think Royce Freeman is primed for a bigger role, particularly on the goal line. And the other thing is just, I am not a Joe Flacco guy. I don't think the offense is going to move the ball. And the secondary is taking a bit of a beating. They're going to be worse than last couple of years. They could give up more points in Denver.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I actually have him lowest. I have him just inside my top 50. I'm not a big Philip Lindsay guy this year. I think the offense is really going to struggle. I really don't know where they're really going to get their points. Joe Flacco, not a huge fan of him. And as you said, Bryce hit it right on the head. Royce Freeman's going to come back. It's really going to be a split backfield, I think, in my opinion. So I don't think Philip Lindsay really has the upside or the floor, to be honest, to be drafted very high.
And I should say, like Bryce has mentioned before, if you can get Lindsay, like obviously it's always the at value question. If you get him at value, you should definitely take him. I took him round 5 yesterday, as a flex play rather than an RB2 play. So I could easily pencil him in and out depending on who is getting more targets, more more carries week over week for the Broncos.
Mike, that's great. That's great value. And also, just something to think about with week 1 on the horizon. Let's say Philip Lindsay blows up week 1, just goes off for 30 points. Use that value and flip him, right? Look to trade early. People want to jump on that. People might be on the Lindsay train. If he explodes week 1, might be an aberration. I would recommend using that to flip him into a better player.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. His ADP right now is right around 50. That is pretty much where I think I would start thinking about taking him, probably between 50 and 60 is where I'd really think about it. But there are definitely some guys that we're going to get to now that I would definitely take over Philip Lindsay. So I guess let's move on. Next up, we have Melvin Gordon.
Melvin Gordon, I mean, this is one of the tougher things to predict because it's not even a question of football value. It's just a question of what exactly is going on in this player's life and are they going to sign a contract, which is always a tough spot to be in. I have him ranked much higher than both Bryce and Amer. I have him at 29. You guys both have him at 40, or 44 and 49 respectively for Amer and Bryce, which, I mean, I just look at it this way. He has like the upside of an RB1. And if you can get that at basically the end of round 3, say, if we're in a 10-team league, that to me is like very attractive because even if he plays, I mean, I personally think that according to the most recent news, which was 11 hours ago, that he follows the 49ers on Instagram, which is interesting. Who knows what exactly could happen and where he could wind up, but you have to take that risk just because if he does wind up signing, he could easily be sort of warranting a first round pick value.
Mike, not only do I have him at 49, I'm dropping him further as the news keeps coming out. News was released. He is going to sit out week 1. News was also released. GM of the Chargers, Tom Telesco, has already said he will not entertain any extension talks with Melvin Gordon. Let's remember, this guy turned down $10 million a year. That would make him a top-paid running back to seek out 14. The Chargers asked him, they told him, if you want to look for a trade, you can. No one's going to pay him that, but I think he's too stuck on that number, and I don't think he's going to come back until he absolutely has to in week 10, at which point Eckler and Justin Jackson, I'm a big Eckler guy, they could have taken over some kind of long-term role.
Yeah, I think Melvin Gordon's really going to hold out. I don't see him coming back anytime soon. In terms of the trade, I don't really see anyone offering him a trade and paying him. I don't think there are many teams with that much cap space right now or that are willing to give up assets and this much cap space to sign Melvin Gordon at this point in the offseason. So I do think he's going to stay on the Chargers this year, and I don't see him coming back until week 10, which is when he absolutely has to for his contract to count for this year. So before then, you're pretty much, I think, going to get zero value out of this guy, which is why I have him at 44. With that being said, I do think, as Bryce said, Austin Eckler's a great option, especially early in the season. But I don't really think that he's going to cut in that much to Melvin Gordon's workload when Melvin Gordon comes back, whenever that may be. I don't really see Austin Eckler as a guy that has the talent to rival Melvin Gordon. All right, next up, we got Josh Jacobs for number 40.
Actually, Amr, you want to do these next two in tandem with each other? You guys have them ranked similarly. I have them ranked similarly in similar kind of I think, issues on both sides.
Sure, let's do it. Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry back to back.
Yeah, Josh Jacobs. First, if we handle Josh Jacobs, Bryce has him ranked 20 slots lower than Amir and myself. I mean, you just have to look at Jacobs as a running back who he's really going to be one of the only. I want to say that at least starting the year, he's definitely the leading bell cow in Oakland, and they do tend to run the ball. I mean, last year Doug Martin led all their rushers with 172 attempts, and I definitely don't see him playing as big of a role in the offense now that they have Jacobs. So you're looking at that kind of upside, if not more, with Jacobs if he does get out there and catch some passes as well. And then for Henry, I mean, the big debate about Henry is: do you view fantasy points? Is how much do you view consistency over a given year or over on a week to week basis for a player? Because if you can stomach a player who is going to have a high upside and a very low floor on a week to week basis, then definitely you could spring for Derrick Henry. But if you're looking for someone, I think who's really going to push your team to a victory once in a while, then you spring for Derrick Henry. Otherwise, if you're kind of a bit more of a risk-averse individual, which I bet Bryce is going to say he is, then I would shy away from Henry.
Bryce, I'm going to just jump in right here. Just some news. Doug Martin has been released off of IR from the Raiders, so it looks like the job is all Josh Jacobs.
Bryce's ranking just jumped 10 slots.
No.
Not really. To me, I actually have both these players ranked just outside my top 50. Admittedly, I'm probably lower on them than I should be. My issue here, though, is both of these offenses are brutal. I am not a fan of the Raider offense at all. They have tons of issues. I don't like John Gruden. And I also wasn't that high on Jacobs coming out of college. He is coming off an injury that he sustained in college. We're not sure how that's going to look. So to me, Jacobs, I'm probably lower on than I should be compared to Henry. Not a fan of that offense. Yes, he's going to be the bell cow, so volume could play up. I'd sooner take a guy like David Montgomery over Josh Jacobs if you're looking to compare rookie running backs here that are the number ones on their team. Moving down to Derrick Henry, similar issue. The Tennessee Titan offense is going to be very bad. The quarterbacks there are Ryan Tannehill and Marcus Mariota. You have no plus traits on either one, with the exception of Mariota's legs, which also takes away from Derrick Henry. Deion Lewis is still there. Corey Davis could be looking for a bigger role. Adam Humphries is there now taking targets away. Henry was never a pass catcher to begin with, and he really only did explode onto the scene the last couple weeks of the season. I think people are losing sight of the fact that he was basically not even fantasy startable the first 12 or so weeks of the year. To me, Derrick Henry is just too big of a risk. I'm not a fan. Jacobs, I should probably be a touch higher on than I am, though.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with Derrick Henry. I just think he's too boom or bust to really play on a week-to-week basis. You just never know when he's going to go off for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns like he did last year. I mean, there was a stretch where Derrick Henry, over the course of 4 weeks, he was the running back 1, which is just insane. But you never know when that's going to happen. And so I really don't think he's consistent enough or productive enough to put in your starting lineup week to week. Josh Jacobs, on the other hand, I do disagree with Bryce on this. I think he's going to be a 3-down back in an improving offense now that they have Antonio Brown. I think the Raiders are going to be slightly better this year than they were last year. And I think he was a first-round pick. He's got the talent. He can catch the ball. He can run. I think he has a much clearer path to the number 1 option or the number 1 running option in Oakland. And so I actually, bringing up the David Montgomery thing, I do have Josh Jacobs a touch higher than David Montgomery just because he does have the job solidified already compared to David Montgomery, who is a little bit hazier in Chicago. All right, so next up we have Marlon Mack, another running back.
Yeah, I think the big thing to think about with Mack, at least, is the retirement of Andrew Luck. I mean, last year, Mack certainly isn't running back who's going to come into the passing game and really play that much of a role. He was only targeted 26 times, I think, all of last year. But he obviously is a big he really is kind of one of those running backs who's truly focused on the running game. Last year, he put up 195 attempts for 908 yards and 9 touchdowns, which is just at 4.7 yards per attempt, which I think is that's what you're looking for in a running back who's going to sort of pound the ball. And I think the Luck's departure actually is something that's good for Mac, because that does mean that the Colts will turn more to their rushing even more than last year, which means you could see him getting north of 200 rushing attempts, which is something that's really good for him as one of those really rush heavy running backs, and I think that's why I have him ranked higher than both of you.
Mike, I'm with you on the volume. I actually was really high on Marlon Mack coming into the preseason. Loved his value. I saw him as a potential fringe RB1, and then Andrew Luck went and retired. Yeah, the volume is going to increase, but he has a higher chance of facing stacked boxes. Now, I still do like Marlon Mack in this offense. Mike, you did mention volume. The other thing for me about Marlon Mack, he's running behind a premier offensive line. Quentin Nelson might be the best interior offensive lineman in all of football. Guy's a mauler. Marlon Mack could still produce here. Nyheim Hines, I like him as a Tariq Cohen-esque player with less upside, but he's not going to steal anything away from Marlon Mack. Mack undoubtedly separated himself from Jordan Wilkins last year, and the defense is still good, lending game script to maybe help Marlon Mack a little bit more. So I have dropped him down since the Luck retirement, but he still has a little bit of upside there.
Yeah, I see both of your points, and there are definitely some things I agree with. I am the lowest on Marlon Mack this year. I have him just outside my top 50, and that's solely based on the fact that Andrew Luck retired. Before Andrew Luck retired, I was with you, Bryce. I had him between running backs 12 and 15, but now he's outside my top 20 running backs. I don't think the offense is going to be that explosive, and I think a lot of his value is going to come from, or was going to come from, his touchdowns and the fact that the Colts were going to be up and game script it would be in his favor. There's a stat that shows that in games where the Colts are leading, Marlon Mack has almost twice as many touches as Nyheim Hines, and it's actually the opposite in games that Colts are trailing. So I think we're going to see a lot of Nyheim Hines this year, because I don't think the Colts are going to be that good. They're not going to be terrible, but I don't think they're going to be great. And I think the touchdown upside for Marlon Mack has definitely plummeted with the loss of Andrew Luck.
Oddly enough, Amer, I hope you're right. I have a lot of shares in Nyheim Hines. So if they're playing from behind, that's good for me.
What round are you taking Hines in?
So when I took him, I believe I took him in the 11th round. I'll take him around there again. Recently, I've been taking more shares of, like, Tony Pollard has been up there. I've been taking more shares of Darwin Thompson. At least that was until LaShawn McCoy signed. Nyheim Hines, for me, jumps them there. I'm going to take him like 11th, 12th round. Someone could jump on him early, though, in like a 9th round, where I've seen Darwin Thompson go occasionally pre-LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, I see that.
All right, let's move on to our first quarterback off the board. No surprises here. It's Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes, we all have ranked right at the same spot, really. Beginning of the 4th round in a 10-team league. You have him at 40, Bryce 44, myself 41. I mean, I think that the bigger thing to point out here is in my drafts so far, I have not seen Patrick Mahomes fall this far. And I think that's just because it's a question of how much you value regression. I mean, if people are projecting him to have comparable stats to last year, I don't necessarily think that's something that's really replicable, even in that Chiefs offense. But if you do, I mean, you could see him going 2nd round, 3rd round. But if you kind of take the difference between those two, you sort of get where he's projected for us, which is around this sort of 40th pick, which takes some regression into account, but still obviously lists him as the number 1 quarterback in all of fantasy by a rather wide margin.
Mike, I agree. I think he's a regression candidate. I mean, the guy threw, 50 touchdowns last season, his first season starting. I'm not sure he can do it again. I think he'll come close. His arm talent is too good. His elusiveness is underrated. I remember that play when he scrambled like 20 yards back and threw a touchdown, back foot, corner of the end zone. That was a beautiful throw. To me, Patrick Mahomes is just it's just depending on how you want to draft. If you view having a top tier quarterback, jump for him. I would advocate that depending on your draft strategy. Me, I'm a big late round quarterback guy. I don't see the value in taking a guy like Patrick Mahomes that early unless you're in a 2 QB format or other kinds of quarterback formats that give more weight to passing yards. So it is going to depend on league. It is going to depend on your draft preference. I'm not an early quarterback guy, but Patrick Mahomes, I think, could do something similar to what he did last year, but I will not reach for him.
Yeah, I mean, not much to say on Patrick Mahomes that you guys haven't covered. Definitely a regression candidate, but I do think even if he does regress, even if it's a significant regression, even if I think he loses about 10 touchdowns, he would still have ended up as the QB1 last year, and I think he's projected to end up, even if he loses, let's say, between 5 and 10 touchdowns, he's still projected to end up as the QB1 this year. So he's definitely money in the bank. But at his current ADP, which is he's at an ADP of 12 right now. That's just way too high for any of us. But if he does fall into the 30s, maybe into the late 30s, that's definitely a point at which you should start looking at him. He's going to be great. Best offense in the league. He's MVP last year. Great player.
I think something important to note there is that Bryce talked about drafting a quarterback early, which, I mean, you could draft a quarterback early, but then there's also the fact that if you want to draft Mahomes because you like having that quarterback early, you're really going to have to spend, I think, more than kind of the risk-adjusted value for Mahomes sort of is, because you're really looking at having to draft him at the second round to be safe, and that's if he doesn't go in the first, which is a very high possibility from what I've seen so far in my drafts.
All right, moving down to our next spot, it's Sony Michel.
Yeah, Sony Michel, I mean, you got to question exactly how much the Patriots are going to run the ball, and you have to do that every year, which makes me a little bit queasy, and that's why I never wind up drafting Sony Michel. I mean, it's clear, looking at the Patriots stats from last year, that when they run the ball, they're going to use Michel more often than not. He had 209 touches. That was the 209 touches. That was the 209 rushes, which was the most on the team. The second was James White with only 94. But he basically brings absolutely no value from the passing game, which definitely devalues him in a PPR league. He had only 11 targets all of last year. And for me, there's always that variability of, Bill Belichick throwing something different at you year over year. Sort of, if Michel isn't producing, or if they choose to go with more of a passing strategy, then you really could see Michel's role kind of be not necessarily be as important to the Patriots, and him play a much less important role.
Yeah, Mike, you hit it a little bit. His value is higher in standard formats. He doesn't offer too much in the way of passing, as you said. To me, he's just a little too touchdown dependent for me to rely on. But more than that, I am actually super high on James White. Out of the three of us, I actually have him ranked by far the highest, inside my top 40 at 36 overall. To me, James White gives you that floor. Great stat that I heard. With Rob Gronkowski, James White averaged a little over 5 targets a game. Without Rob Gronkowski, 7.7. And if you haven't heard, Rob Gronkowski is retired. So James White's floor is only going to rise. He was a low-key RB1 last year. I think people are too low on him and a little too high on Sony Michel just because of how Sony performed in the playoffs. And to me, just a little too touchdown dependent to be relied on every week.
So I have Sony Michel a lot higher than you guys. That might be because of my inherent New England Patriots bias, but I don't really think so. I think the Patriots are definitely trying to move into a power running team. We saw that at the end of last season, especially in the playoffs. I think they recognize that Tom Brady is on his way down from his insane heights, but I get the concerns a little bit, but I'm on the Sony Michel bandwagon this year. I think the Patriots are going to run the ball a ton. He's going to get a lot of goal line work, and I have heard out of Patriots camp that his pass catching has improved. That might just be a facade from Bill Belichick as usual, but I think even if he doesn't get a lot of passing down work, I still think he is a top 20 running back for me. I think his upside in this great offense and his touchdowns are just going to carry him. All right, so next up we have Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, Cooper Kupp is somebody that I have. I think Bryce is the highest of all of us. He has him at 41. I have him at 49. But Kupp for me is someone who kind of does offer a bit of value, just because if you look to his last full season, which was in 2017, he was actually the top targeted receiver for the Rams. Second was Gurley, third was Woods, and fourth was Sammy Watkins, who's not even there anymore. And obviously Gurley is a big question mark, but you do have the addition of Brandon Cooks from last year, and you really haven't gotten to see Kupp work that much with Woods and Cooks just for a half season so far. So with that in mind, I think he has a lot of upside, but you obviously want to make sure that you're valuing the upside appropriately and kind of risk adjusting that with the fact that if he doesn't see a lot of the target share, his value could decline precipitously.
I do like Cup. I do have him, as you said, Mike, a little bit higher than you guys. I have him at 41. To me, it comes down to chemistry. Jared Goff loves him. Jared Goff loves him in the red zone specifically. I had Cooper Kupp last year. It was phenomenal up until he did tear his ACL. And on that subject, ACLs don't really scare me anymore. Guys come back very successful. Just look at Adrian Peterson. I think Cooper Kupp is going to be primed, if healthy, for a full season for another big year in that Rams offense.
Yeah, I mean, even though he's a third-ranked wide receiver in that offense, it's still one of the best offenses in the NFL. I think he's kind of the safety blanket for Jared Goff, and I think he's going to get a ton of receptions, and he is looked for in the red zone, so he has that touchdown upside that you're looking for. We do have him ranked the lowest out of the three Rams receivers, and that's probably just because of a combination of we haven't seen him in a while and he's coming off the ACL, so still a good option, but if you're looking at Rams wide receivers, we did mention the other two a little bit higher. All right, next up we have Minitron, Kenny Golladay.
Minitron, I love it. I mean, the sky can sort of be the limit for Kenny Golladay because he is going to be the receiver this year in Detroit. Obviously, you also have Marvin Jones, but Jones is sort of very, very late flyer at this point in terms of fantasy value. Golladay last year had 119 targets. Second was Theo Riddick with 74. Third was Golden Tate with 69. Bryce, can you tell me what Theo Riddick and Golden Tate have in common?
They are both no longer on the Lions, Mike.
Exactly. So that opens up a good amount of targets for Golladay to even increase last year's performance, where he was a stud receiver with over 1,000 yards. I mean, I think maybe the bigger question here is just sort of a touchdown perspective. He only put up 5 touchdowns last year. But, I mean, if he does get in the end zone a little bit more, he could be a very, very, very valuable receiver, maybe even go into wide receiver 1 territory.
I like Kenny. I like Kenny a lot, actually, coming out of college. I drafted him as my late-round flyer. His rookie years was somewhat of a year too early on him there. I like, with Kenny Golladay, game script. The defense is not great, even though it is Matt Patricia-led. They're going to throw. Matthew Stafford has always had a big arm. He'll still have a big arm. I think he's actually primed for coming back to earth a little bit. He regressed way too far last year. He'll be more like his normal self this year, I hope. I do like Kenny Golladay. The targets, other targets anyway, Mike, you said it, they're gone. Kenny has a lot of upside, but somewhat of a lower floor just based on that offense.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I don't think his floor is very high, and he could take off with the number 1 job, and he could get a ton of air yards from Matt Stafford, who loves to throw deep. But his floor is really what's holding him back for me. I have him at 46, so it is right between you guys, and that's kind of, I think, everyone's concern with him is the floor, just because it's not a great offense. And just one thing I'll note, I think that his ADP compared to Marvin Jones, I think the difference between those two ADPs is a little bit crazy. I don't see them as far apart as most people do. I think Marvin Jones is a solid option, and he's a little bit better than his ADP, and I think Kenny Golladay is a little bit worse than how he's being drafted at the moment.
So you think Jones is going to take more of those Riddick and Tate targets?
I don't necessarily think that Jones is going to take more of them. I think that it's going to be split a little bit more 50-50, and I think that at their current ADPs, I think Marvin Jones is definitely the better value for me than Kenny Golladay.
That's fair.
All right, let's move on to another wide receiver. At wide receiver 19, we have Chris Godwin.
Yeah, I mean, we have Godwin as the wide receiver 2 down there in Tampa Bay, which I think is a very, favorable spot to be in, considering that the Buccaneers are fourth in terms of passing attempts for all of last year. And I think Godwin is sort of one of those players who also does have high upside at this receiver position. But at the same time, there's also the chance where he really hasn't necessarily been a huge fantasy receiver in years past. So you don't necessarily have you haven't been able to see Godwin be consistent week over week.
Yeah, so a couple notes that I have, or not really notes, more opinions that I have on Chris Godwin here. A lot of people are high on him, seeing him as the second in command of that offense behind Mike Evans, potentially even challenging Mike Evans for that wide receiver one role. Personally, I actually view him as the third option in that offense still. I absolutely love O.J. Howard this year. We'll get to him in a little bit. I'm big on O.J. Howard. And honestly, if you're looking at these, I'm going to clump a couple slot receivers here together. Chris Godwin, Tyler Boyd, Allen Robinson. He'll run a little bit more on the sidelines too. Then looking at some other guys, Tyler Lockett and DJ Moore. I have all five ranked ahead of Chris Godwin, with Godwin coming in just outside my top 50 at 51. So I think there are some better options just because those other guys that I mentioned are either the top target or unequivocally the second target on their team. The one thing that is going for Chris Godwin, though, is game script. Defense is terrible. They're going to throw.
Yeah, I am definitely higher on Chris Godwin than you guys. I have him at 42, so I do have him above both Cooper Kupp and Kenny Golladay, which we just talked about. And I think these guys are kind of making a tier of back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 guys. And for me, Chris Godwin is definitely at the top of this tier. I have him, as I said, higher than Cooper Kupp, Golladay. I have him definitely higher than Boyd and DJ Moore. I have him higher than Allen Robinson. I think I'm a big fan of Chris Godwin this year. I think the Bruce Arians offense is going to be explosive. I think Jameis Winston, although he does throw a lot of interceptions, he throws all the time. He's a big thrower. And this offense is not going to run at all pretty much this season. So I think even if he is the third wide receiver or the third pass catcher, which I don't really see happening, I think he's still got a pretty solid floor with a ton of work coming his way this year. All right, next up, a guy we mentioned, Tyler Boyd at wide receiver 20.
Yeah, Tyler Boyd kind of just makes you ask the question exactly how much do you trust in the Bengals offense, which I think is a really good question to ask as someone playing fantasy football at all. Because in reality, their offense has been up and down. Obviously, we've seen AJ Green come out as a very good receiver. I'd say about 3 years ago and before then. But just looking at the Bengals on face, they were I think it was 18th in passing attempts last year, so nothing really to write home about. You do have the fact that AJ Green's injury seems to not necessarily be very good at the moment. He is still in a walking boot. So that's something you should definitely take into account when thinking about Boyd. But in general, I think he's just kind of someone that I'd shy away from at this point in the draft. But if you can get him for good value because he's dropping, I'd snag him like I did in I think 1 or 2 leagues.
So, Mike, you did mention AJ Green. He is still in that walking boot. But from what I hear, the chatter is that he'll be good to go week 4-ish, right around there. So that is the number one option coming back. I did give my take on the Bengal offense when we talked about Joe Mixon. I'm not a fan. I'm not an Andy Dalton guy. I do like Tyler Boyd just as an option. I have him 43rd overall, actually the highest of all three of us, but not confidently. Just to throw a couple stats out here. Tyler Boyd in 2018 last year when he broke out, 9.5 yards per target. His previous high came in 2016, 7.4 yards per target. So is last year an aberration, or is last year now his new average? I'm not exactly sure. I don't trust Andy Dalton. The offensive line, as I mentioned with Joe Mixon, did not get better, arguably got worse. Who knows what it's going to look like? The only thing that Boyd has going for him is that his route tree is a little more over the middle and a little more in the slot.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions with the Bengals this year, especially AJ Green out. The offensive lines had some injuries early in camp and in preseason. So I'm not huge on the Cincinnati offense, but I do like Tyler Boyd this year. I think he does have a path to be the number one wide receiver, especially if AJ Green's injury lingers or kind of comes back later in the season. And I think the Bengals actually like Tyler Boyd a lot more than we've seen in the past. Just they signed him to a new deal. They gave him a good amount of money. So that shows some sort of trust in him. And I think Andy Dalton's has shown in the past that he can support solid wide receivers, especially with AJ Green. So I think that he's going to have fantasy relevance, and he's definitely going to be fringe RB2 or high end or running back wide receiver 2 or high wide receiver 3 this year. But out of the tier we've been talking about, I actually have him at the bottom of this tier with Tyler Lockett, Chris Godwin, Kenny Golladay, Cooper Kupp. I have Tyler Boyd at the bottom of this tier. All right, so next up we have Tyler Lockett at wide receiver 21.
Yeah, you said bottom of this tier because that's where I have Tyler Lockett firmly stationed. Just because, I mean, the upside really isn't there at all. I know that in the early rounds, at this point, you're kind of looking into almost kind of what I like to think of as the second part of the draft. So you can value upside a little bit more and kind of throw away floor. But Lockett is on a team that was dead last in pass attempts last year. The Seahawks aren't going to go out there and gun the ball, which is something that I think makes you want to shy away from a receiver, especially when you're not necessarily sure sort of how the target share is going to break down. Last year you had Doug Baldwin obviously leading in targets, but then retiring. And I see Lockett taking some of those targets, but at the same time, like we're talking here about Golladay, who's easily going to have over 110 targets, whereas like 110 targets is basically a fourth of all of the targets on Lockett's team, which is sort of an absurd amount there. So I would definitely shy away from Tyler Lockett just because the offense isn't really meant to have any star receivers really.
Mike, I'm actually going to have to disagree with you here. I think Lockett has tremendous upside. You mentioned Russell Wilson not throwing that much. I do think that's going to come back, but also I think it's going to come back somewhat organically, not even in game plan. Quick stat here for you. Last year, Russell Wilson threw touchdowns on 8.2% of his passes. His career average is 6. So just on volume alone, Tyler Lockett might be poised for more yards, assuming Russell Wilson isn't throwing touchdowns all the time anymore. I mentioned this with Chris Carson. I don't think that this offense is going to be as reliant on the run as they're suggesting. Pete Carroll is still run first. It will be run first. But I do like Tyler Lockett. The only thing I'm nervous about is touchdowns with DK Metcalf. Guy's a physical freak. He'll be the red zone target. But assuming Russell Wilson's touchdown percentage comes back to normal, that opens up the door for more Lockett routes to be completed.
You know, on the Metcalf front, when I'm in the gym, people have actually confused me for
Oh, man. You guys will get that joke when you see Mike in person. So back to Tyler Lockett. I do think he's a good option. I think he's going to get a lot of targets this year. I don't think DK Metcalf is going to be that good. He is obviously a physical freak, but I think a lot of wide receivers and DK, lumping him in, really have trouble in their rookie year. So I think he's going to struggle to get acclimated to the NFL speed. And I think just the connection between Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson is a really strong connection. They are due for a regression because that's the only way they can go. Last year, Russell Wilson had a perfect passer rating when he was targeting Tyler Lockett, which is obviously going to go down. But I think the increase in targets left from Doug Baldwin's departure are really going to boost Tyler Lockett up into the wide receiver 2 mix. And so that's where I have him. All right, rounding out the top 50, we have O.J. Howard.
Yeah, O.J. Howard, I think just in terms of rankings, it's hard to kind of quantify exactly when you want to pick him because you really have to ask the question to yourself of when do I want to select a tight end? Because if you're not selecting one of Kittle, Kelsey, or Ertz, then you're kind of left. I think the only 3 tight ends I would jump for at that point are Howard, Ingram, and Vance McDonald from Pittsburgh. But I mean, with that aside, there is a good reason to jump for O.J. Howard. I mean, he's going to be, as Bryce mentioned before, probably the second and maybe third target in this Buccaneers offense, which is something fantasy owners can really look forward to. But at the same time, you have to ask, is it worth jumping for him at this point when other people may be doing the same?
Mike, I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to say yes. He is worth jumping for here. Just to give a quick answer. Somewhat of a hot take. I think O.J. Howard is going to be the tight end 2 this year, only behind Kelsey. I think Kittle's going to regress a little bit. I think Ertz isn't going to perform as well with Carson Wentz. Foles targets tight ends a little more frequently. O.J. Howard is primed for a huge year. I actually, across all my leagues, have 100% ownership in him, and I've gotten him at the back end of the 5th round or that 5-6 turn every draft. I think that's great value for this guy, and you don't have to spend the same kind of draft capital that you're using on the top 3 to get a similar kind of player. Very, very high on O.J. Howard.
You really love to diversify, huh?
Oh, yeah. Love my diversified portfolios. I really believe in that system,
Yeah, I am a big fan of O.J. Howard this year. I do have him also right around where you guys have him. I have him at 47th overall, so I am highest out of you guys. I think he's going to be great. I think, as I said, with Chris Godwin, his offense is going to be good. James Winston's going to throw the ball, and he's got a ton of upside. And so I love drafting him, especially where he's being drafted at 55. I think that's really solid value for O.J. Howard, especially if you miss out on those top 3 guys in the second tier, O.J. Howard, Evan Ingram. And actually, I'm going to have to disagree with you on the third guy in this tier, Mike. I have Hunter Henry at tight end 6, not Vance McDonald.
Ooh.
But O.J. Howard definitely at the top of this second tier of tight ends, and definitely has a path to be a top 3 tight end this year. So high upside. He's got a decent floor in this Bruce Arians offense. I like a lot of O.J. Howard this year as well.
Mayor, definitely with you there. O.J. Howard, the top of the tier 2, maybe even bottom tier 1.
I wouldn't go that far.
But also definitely Hunter Henry over definitely Hunter Henry over Vance McDonald, maybe even Austin Hooper over Vance McDonald.
I like your vision of having him as the 2 tight end this year, Bryce. I think that's a good hot take.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. We'll see how it plays out.
All right. That wraps up our top 50 consensus fantasy football players for this year, 2019. Thanks for joining me, boys. If you guys have been listening this long, we thank you. It'd be great to drop a like, share.
Absolutely.
All right. We will see you next time.